various regions around the world. So I'll hand it over to our moderator, who's going to be taking over from me. Tom, take it away, sir.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. We've got a fantastic set of panelists today. I thought I'd kick us off just with maybe a bit of an intro into what a digital ID is, and then we can dive into some of the questions. Digital ID, I picked up a sort of rough definition of what it is. There are sort of hundreds of definitions out there. I don't think we could say there's an official one. The one I thought I'd go with is an online or networked identity adopted or claimed in cyberspace by an individual, organization, or electronic device. Now, I'm sure there are many things wrong with that definition, and we can pick that apart, but I also thought it was worth picking out some of the sort of key things that actually make up a digital ID. And in sort of my sort of assessment of it, there were maybe 4 key areas. So one was that it's verified and authenticated to a high degree of assurance. The second is that it's unique. The third is that it's established with individual consent. And the fourth is that it protects user privacy and ensures control over personal data. And every one of our panelists today has a unique perspective on this question. I think it's worth just taking stock of maybe where we are. And I was looking at some of the World Bank figures. According to the World Bank, almost 1 billion people globally lack any form of legally recognized identification, and that's digital or otherwise. And then an additional 3.4 billion have some type of legally recognized ID, but have limited ability to use it in the digital world. And then the remaining 3.2 billion have a legally recognized identity and participate in the digital economy, but may not be able to use the ID effectively and efficiently online. So that just gives a bit of a picture of where we are. There's a long way to go, but I think what it really shows is the ability for digital ID to have an impact globally on an absolutely enormous scale. And I guess another way of looking at that, McKinsey have tried to sort of look at that by way of the impact it could have on GDP. And their assessment, they've done it sort of with a test set of countries, including Nigeria and Kenya in that list that they looked at. But sort of over a global scale, they thought that country to country, digital ID could unlock economic value of an equivalent to 3 to 13% of GDP. So there's many ways to look at it. And I think it's important, when we talk about how exciting it is and the delivery channels for financial services that increase, particularly more so due to COVID, and the benefits will certainly come on to, including reducing fraud, financial inclusion, and those that I've talked about on impacting the economy. It's also important to recognize the risks, data breaches, cybersecurity threats. There's risks out there that need to be balanced as well. So I'll bring it back to my initial question: what is digital ID? And I'll bring in my first panelist. So Seema, welcome, co-founder, COO of Nuggets. I'd be really interested on a bit from you on digital ID, and in particular, if you could touch on the concept of self-sovereign ID, which is something I know is particularly something you've looked at.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for having me today. So Tom, thanks for that really comprehensive overview of the power of digital identity, but also just the huge benefits that it can provide for inclusion. And all of those great stats that you just quoted there. And I think really that's the key, right? Digital ID, as opposed to what we have today, which is an identity that can be breached, that's centrally managed. The difference is with the self-sovereign identity, it's one that is managed by the individual, and the dissemination of that information or the attributes can be shared by them directly. They can choose what to share, when to share it, and how to share it, and even revoke the access to that identity. And that's why self-sovereign identity is just so exciting right now. And we think it has a real big role to play when we think about the title of this panel around, frictionless experiences and just the huge benefit it can provide for inclusion, but also for financial services.
Yeah, and there's a huge element of control there. Control to data, control to the issue around revoking authorization is a really interesting one as well. Thank you very much, Seema. I think there's lots to be said around how the financial institutions implementing the advances in digital ID within their operations and how this might be changing customer experience. Seema, I know you've got some angle on this, but I'm going to bring in Olivier as well. Olivier, Director, Aerow ECM. Maybe tell us a little bit, Olivier, about what Aerow does and how particularly electronic content management and digital ID is being sort of implemented into the operations of financial institutions.
Yes, so we are in Aerow expert in electronic content management and all the services and the integration of tools used to manage document. So capturing document, creating document, archiving document, and processing also validation and approval process, extra treatment on based on document. So if we focus on the KYC, for example, or for the retrieving the ID of a people, we need to create or to store a passport, proof of address, proof of bank, birth certificate, and a lot of documents. So in the past, we are mostly involved of passing the document, treating the document, extract the data from the document to do the screening, the due diligence, and the compliance process. And now what is mostly changing, we implement more and more process and workflow with a business process management solution, for example, and connect to third part to identifying, to do the check on the screening with a faster process and accurate result and so on. So it's very key to get this access to prove or to find easily the data of the digital ID or an ID.
And this aspect of sort of third-party checks and proofing is a really, really important one. Seema, let me bring you back in on this. I mean, how are we seeing data being used to corroborate customers' ID, and what benefits does it bring in that you're seeing?
Yeah, no, great question. So look, Olivier, to just add to that as well, I think the work that Olivier is doing is great, because what it will do is essentially associate and validate the identities that then get created. But I really do think like data sovereignty, distributed ledgers, they're just bringing huge benefits to organizations right now, and financial organizations as well. And they've got a real key position to play within this space, because today you and I still trust them as, you know, custodians of our most important data today. So actually they've got a huge role to play within, you know, not only for themselves, when you think about all the things that are happening right now, where it's fraud, the data breaches, or social engineering that the pandemic has just exacerbated, but also on the customer experience side, you know, you will see once you have that digital identity, how it can unlock frictionless experiences, how it can unlock, you know, faster time to market for products and services, or operational efficiency. So I think really once you have a digital ID that's been validated and proofed, it goes way beyond just the eKYC process, or that taking and proving that identity. Actually, you prove out that identity over time, and you can keep the confidence level high of an identity throughout its lifetime. Does that go any way to answering that, Tom?
It does. It does. I wonder if I could pick up a further point there around whether you believe some of the sort of concerns around privacy are justified, given the amount of data that both you and Olivier are talking about that's required in order to do that verification, authentication.
I think they absolutely are. Look, you and I know that, you know, personal information should be owned and controlled by the individual, and that privacy is it's a fundamental human right. And we've tried to do all of this in a centralized way, and actually consumers and the businesses have had very little control over that data. And despite the billions spent on things like cybersecurity, fraud prevention of social engineering, we're still seeing the data breaches, we're seeing fraud at a massive high. So we know that model doesn't work. So now what we're looking at is more distributed type models and potentially self-sovereign identity type models that actually allow for an identity to be managed by the individual or the business. And so I think they are warranted, because we've tried it the other way, and we know that all of the current solutions and products are like almost like sticky tape. trying to protect almost like this big silo of data that we know we just can't protect. So we almost need to totally fundamentally change the way data is stored today and reimagine how it could be. And we think, you know, this distributed self-sovereign identity way absolutely addresses, you know, the privacy and data breaches and the fraud concerns. Yeah.
I mean, there's an education piece there around also helping people understand how that can be achieved. Let me bring in our other panelists and bring this back to sort of set the current landscape in Mauritius and sort of the rest of Africa. Arvind, Chief Information Security Officer at the FSC in Mauritius. Fantastic to have your perspective today. Can you introduce where we are, do you think, in terms of the development of a full digital ID in Mauritius?
Yes. So currently in Mauritius, there have been the introduction of the new digital ID card in Mauritius in 2013, and the system I think was designed to be able to be used as a digital identity kind of thing, because it had like a chip which could store the fingerprints and a digital certificate that could be validated by a certificate authority. But I think due to privacy and some cybersecurity concerns, the idea was dropped about the ability to use fingerprint with that. And currently it's being used as a traditional identity card for verifying face-to-face identity. And with the advent of COVID and pandemic, there has been a tendency to use identity proofing remotely through the internet and other digital channels. So they still use the identity card, but through remote identification purposes and for doing eKYC. So this is currently the status.
And interesting there that I guess the introduction of the card, that meant everybody in Mauritius had the card. So to some degree, it gives people access to the document. But then I guess some of the sort of security benefits that come with maybe a full digital ID are still missing if you're using the sort of physical ID for identity proofing. There's a really interesting set of initiatives around sort of data sharing, I understand, and particularly the development of a sort of information highway in Mauritius, which will, as I understand it, facilitate data sharing between government agencies, but also might, in the long term, benefit the private sector. Can you talk to us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, so the information highway currently is mainly regarding the population database, which has the identification details that has been collected through, like I mentioned before, the National ID project. So there is a big database containing all these details for the population. And currently, the path towards integration has been mainly for the public sector. So let's say you have the tax collection, you have the vehicle registration and other government services. These have been able to subscribe to this kind of data sets to validate certain formalities in the government sectors. And in the long term, it's probably going to be integrated with private sector to be able to facilitate other kind of businesses, even small and medium enterprises. They could leverage on that.
That's I think that's a really good point around tax collection, but also the payment of sort of benefits as well, and other sort of aspects of the social system. The ability for real change there. Yoseph, I want to bring you in on the sort of wider African perspective. I mean, I understand there's loads of interesting stuff. I'm only just scratching the surface of some of the things out there. I'm just looking at a few. Sort of Zimbabwe. There's a biometric system that's being introduced by the Public Service Commission, and Kenya. There's examples there of them trying to sign up everybody to sort of digital solutions as well. But I guess in your role as the Digital Services Operations Manager for COMESA, how are you seeing digital ID being adopted across member states? And what can you tell us about where we're up to kind of on the sort of wider question in Africa of the adoption of digital ID?
Thanks, Thomas. In COMESA member states, I can start from the study we have conducted for the 21 member states. We're trying to implement a digital financial inclusion plan for micro, small, and medium enterprises that are at the bottom of the pyramid of this financial ecosystem. So by the time we did this study, we assessed the landscape, the digital infrastructure landscape of 9 member countries, 9 piloted member countries, based on the trade contributions they make in COMESA region and they trade between themselves, like from the northern part, Egypt, Ethiopia, from the eastern part where the pioneers of M-Pesa, like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, from the southern leg, Zambia, Malawi, and from the Indian Ocean Commission, Heart of Indian Ocean Commission, Mauritius. So by the time we did the study, the business case study, and we have found out that there are different infrastructure landscapes. Some are underdeveloped, some are highly developed, like Kenya. So we tried to harmonize the policies, and we have identified about 8 policy blocks. One of them is Electronic Transaction Act. This Electronic Transaction Act has digital IDs and KYC infrastructure to be harmonized. So we have almost agreed on the way to go. We had a public-private dialogue by January. Then we had agreed on how to go about it. Then we're trying to implement it with some selected member countries of highly infrastructure-ready countries, digital savvy countries. But the landscape is different. Some countries have advanced, some have less advanced digital ID infrastructure.
I mean, this is fascinating, and I really, obviously, with my sort of hat on as a lawyer, always fascinated by regulation and the examples of regulation being both an incredible sort of driver for growth, but also occasionally a real sort of block to the potential of innovation. And I see that sort of no more so than on a cross-border angle. So the work you're doing in terms of harmonization, to me, is so important and will make such a difference to the rate of adoption. Do you feel that harmonization is becoming easier or more difficult following the sort of changes we've seen during COVID?
In principle, COMESA member states, they have agreed to harmonize those policies. But when you come to the ground, in reality, there are infrastructure-related issues. So there are portions that we should work on. But COVID-19 has its own merits and demerits. In fact, it has accelerated our work. Especially most closed economies, they are opening up. Most rules, national retail payment rules and strategies have been adopted by the parliament. So I'm looking at optimistically positive for the future. We're on the right pace and track.
I'm very glad to hear that, and I share your optimism. Staying then on the topic of the impact of COVID. I mean, we've touched briefly on the sort of new channels. I would also, I think, echo some of the sort of sentiments around how remote a lot of the solutions are getting. Olivier, let me bring you back in. How are you seeing changes in demand for new channels in terms of delivering financial services, impacting your work in sort of implementing things into operations?
What's happened, in fact, our customer, which are bank, insurance, managing company, involved in a regulation and so on, ask us to go faster on digitalize everything, paperless everything. So we are not able to prove a passport with signing on it or a stamp on it, and because at the time, for example, for Mauritius, no post office working, and everything is delayed by the situation. So to unlock the situation, we need to use the tool and the software. So we are mostly mobilized to finding solution for that, doing everything digitalized. So the screening, but also receiving the document, receiving the proof of the KYC and so on. And effectively, the having digital ID could be a really a nice solution to speed up everything.
Yeah, I think the sentence there around digitalize everything really really stood out to me. Seema, I'd be interested on how you see the potential for scalability in terms of digital ID, these new channels, demand to digitalize everything. How scalable is it?
I think very scalable, because if you think about, I mean, yeah, I just want to echo everything Yoseph and Olivier has said there. We're seeing the same demand from our customers because consumers are more connected, they're doing things more remotely, and they are demanding that. And it's really accelerated digital transformation for lots of our clients. And we're seeing the same urgency that you hear from Olivier, for, nuggets as well. So we hear you on that. And on the scalability side, I think where we're lucky, a lot of the digital ID products are very new, which means that they are also probably don't have any technical debt. Like we have no technical debt because we're all using the very up-to-date, whether it's, and I'm going to talk beyond myself here because I'm not a technical architect, but essentially our DevOps team are phenomenal. So they're using things like, they're able to scale horizontally, vertically, and not have to pay for. And these platforms are incredibly resilient. And because everything's distributed, it means that there's that added benefit there of, from the data breach side of things as well, and the privacy and the security side. So I would say incredibly scalable. And, our solution, for example, we co-host as well across a number of different providers, AWS, Azure, but also it is just the way it's been architected, because you're implementing just these newer technologies now, like Kubernetes and, the ability to scale. So I would say incredibly scalable.
Well, that's good to hear. That's obviously the answer we wanted. Arvind, let me ask you a little bit about some of the projects being undertaken under the supervision of the FSC, particularly in ways that might support these new channels and remote transactions.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys already know, but there was an announcement made in the budget saying that the FSC will go live with a new platform for the licensing and supervision function. So the objective is to digitalize this part regarding the financial institution. So they will be able to have a portal where they will be able to submit their licensing documents and other documents for registration purposes. So the objective is to digitalize everything. And in the short term, financial institutions will be able to interact with the FSC fully remotely. And depending on whether we are going to implement digital signatures and electronic signatures as well, so it might be completely paperless in the near future.
I mean, that's really interesting to hear. And Yoseph, you touched on this earlier, but I guess, how do you see digital ID improving access, particularly to those micro SMEs you mentioned before? Is that a sort of key area in terms of financial inclusion and some of the work that you're doing?
Yes, actually, we're trying to link it up in the form of mobile payment, in the form of mobile.
I think Yoseph froze for me. We'll move on and we'll come back when we can hear properly. Let's actually dive in.
Digital ID.
Oh, Yoseph, sorry, you're back.
Because these
we lost you for a moment.
Micro, small, and medium enterprises, they have revolving transaction, so they don't have access to creditworthiness. So we're going to assist them so that they can access finance using the transactions they do each and every day, so that even if they don't touch the revolving capital in the transaction, they do have also financial access to the financial industry. In fact, they are going to be formalized, a part of the regulatory system. The finance ministers and the central banks will be aware of the transactions that is going on across the border, and they are in a better position to plan the infrastructure projects for them also, because they know the magnitude of the transaction that is going on across the border. Thank you.
No, we lost you there for a moment, but I definitely got the point you were making there, particularly around credit worthiness, and I think I see that as a real part of this change in financial inclusion, giving people sort of credit worthiness and an ability to track payments they may have made, to give people sort of credit ratings and access to additional financial services. Let's tackle head on the question of the difficulties and the risks posed by digital ID, because it is a very important part of it, and something that is holding the potential for change back a little bit, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly. Arvind, let me start with you. You obviously have to balance the sort of initiatives in terms of your obligations as a regulator. How do you see the main concerns for you in this area that you have to balance in all the decisions you're making?
So concerning the FSC, the FATF recently issued its statement regarding the use of digital identity systems, and it was mainly regarding the money laundering and terrorism financing risk that may arise due to the cybersecurity aspect regarding the use of digital ID. And the main concern was regarding the ability for financial institutions to handle digital ID in a secure way. So they have certain recommendations regarding how this should be governed. So regarding the storage, processing, and use of digital ID. And on FSC side, we are favorable to the adoption of digital ID, but we are definitely going to go forward and issue some guidelines regarding how they should be governed. So mainly in terms of the people, processors, technology that support it, and the best practices in terms of cybersecurity regarding the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data.
Yeah, no, I think that there's some real sort of important things that you've highlighted there. Yoseph, taking that on a sort of more cross-border element, you spoke very well around the sort of harmonization piece. I wonder whether there is also a harmonization of thinking in terms of the risks that are posed, and whether that might be part of the solution in terms of if we can harmonize the thinking around the key risks and tackle those on a sort of multi-level made in that, and that's something you're seeing as part of the harmonization piece.
Actually, as part of harmonization, there are about 8 policy block areas. One of them is Electronic Transaction Act. That includes the KYC and the digital ID. The other one is the security, the security part. There are also another blocks that are to be harmonized, but all in all, the risk I see is the different landscape, the digital landscape among the countries. That's why to start with the 21 member countries, we have selected the 9 countries based on the trade contribution they make between themselves. Then when we start really implementing, integrating this digital payment platform, we're going to go narrow down for 4 or 5 countries. We need to make sure that these countries are with everything is ready, and they are to adopt the system and they are to use it. After that, we will assist the others in customization of the policies, and we have to assist them. We have to bring them into equal level. But the risk I see is the different landscapes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, it is very much, because you talked earlier as well about the different rates of development and the different infrastructure and the different landscapes, the risks will absolutely also be different. Olivier, can I ask you just quickly, how would you assess the trustworthiness of a digital ID prior to sort of its deployment?
The trust coming from, I think, the sources where you check the digital ID, as I think Yoseph told, certification and the legal part is very important in the Transaction Act, and putting a framework in place to assure that the customer and not the customer, everybody use the good way to check the digital ID. In fact, what the risk we could have is everybody will move fast on that and try to find solution. And if there is no legal solution or good solution, they will find another solution. So using an API somewhere to having the data, or using another way to notify people, I don't know, Facebook ID or something like that, which is not good because it's not regulated as a finance certificate, or could be used in finance bank or something like that. So we need to move and to apply something which is regulated and certificated. I'm not sure, we maybe lost Thomas.
I think we've lost Thomas.
I think yes.
I think we have indeed. That must be.
Seems to be the case.
It must be the dodgy internet in Europe.
Yeah.
Where us African countries are having no issues at all.
I was going to add to that, Olivier, just to, really good, obviously massive risks. I think from my perspective, it is just ensuring, we've all heard about the benefits, right, of digital ID. We know that and I loved what Yoseph was talking about there around the ability to create almost like a reputation with your identity through your transactions. And I think, again, because if you want to access financial services, but you don't have the credit worthiness, it's really interesting that you can build that reputation model with your identity to be able to gain access to financial services. And I think from my perspective, it's just making sure, to your point, Olivier, that there is a trust framework of kind that is agreed, so that there is a minimum set of requirements that providers need to adhere to be able to become almost like the trust provider, or the verification of that original identity. And then the second part for me is, all this technology is phenomenal, but we need to make sure that no one's left behind, right? To Tom's original point around, the billion globally without an identity, I think that's really key, that we need to make sure with all this technology, there is a way that we don't leave anyone behind. Oh, he's back.
I'm very sorry. Thank you for ably filling in without me. I got kicked out there for a second. I was actually just going to say, I wonder how we're doing for time and leave time for questions, but maybe before we go on to questions, I was maybe just going to finish on a more positive note, having tackled the key risks there. Could I just have one statement from each of you on why you're excited about the advances in digital ID and what it might mean for the future? And I'll just go with how I see you on screen. Arvind, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. So for me, given that I'm from a cybersecurity background and I'm the CISO, for me, digital ID would be a very good opportunity to explore how we can federate identities across multiple systems, because currently, let's say here we manage multiple systems, multiple platforms, each one having their own identity, being centralized somewhere. It's a very siloed approach. So maybe if we have some kind of distributed identity that can be aligned across all the systems, it will be better in terms of management and as well as security.
Thank you, Arvind. Yoseph, do you want to give us your quick view why you might be excited about the advances in digital ID and what it might mean for the future?
For us, we like to implement this as part of the digital financial inclusion plan in such a way that there will be secured, affordable, transparent payment platform. In the same way, money laundering is reduced, and know your customer transaction is very critical in the financial payment scheme. Thank you.
Thanks, Yoseph. Olivier? the same question?
Yeah, implementing digital ID is the way to go after more on digital solution and digital process and application. So it's just a way to enter in this world. In fact, after we could discuss on e-signature, digital signature, and transaction and finance. But I think it's the first point. It's the first step to go.
Seema, over to you.
Yeah, no, so from my perspective, I think is an incredibly exciting time for digital identity and self-sovereign identity, because, you know, we've seen how it's been done before, and we know that's broken, and we know that there's a phenomenal solution to not only give back individuals or people control of their personal data, but also to access and include them within the financial services, which are just so key for their everyday, and, you know, getting people out of poverty and all of those sorts of things, and access to products and services. And I'm really excited because I feel that there's been a real tipping point in regulation, consumer sentiment, the pandemic. It's all become essentially like a perfect storm. So really excited for the next few years and seeing how this accelerates us.
I really obviously would echo the sentiment of all of our panelists today. I would also like to just say thank you very much for spending the time. I'm being informed that we are actually out of time for questions, so that is on me. Apologies. The conversation flowed too well, and we've run out of time. But what I will say is I feel like you've really got a fantastic view from a wide range of panelists today, giving you the sort of public, private, cross-border, domestic view on some of the key issues here. And I really would also, to sort of Seema's point around the tipping point, I also feel like this is something I'm speaking about at the dinner table with people who aren't interested in sort of financial services, who aren't interested in regulation. I guess I see with even my children, the concept of something like digital ID is nowhere near as foreign to them as it would have been to myself when I was a child. So there's certainly no going back. It's here to stay. I would invite all the attendees to connect and network on the event platform. And thank you very much for attending. Do reach out to the team with any questions that may not have been answered, and we can factor that into some of the events we may be hosting in the future. So thank you very, very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to hosting maybe another session on the topic in the future where we can reassess where we've got to and how we've kind of progressed in terms of advances, tackling those risks, but making sure that the benefits that we've all talked about are certainly realized, because the opportunity for financial inclusion, the opportunity for GDP growth is very real, and the impact I feel like it will have in Africa, potentially more so than anywhere, is clear for all to see. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoy your day.